The crystalline spires of Voidwood Academy stretched impossibly upward, defying the conventional laws of physics that most species in the known universe had once considered immutable. The architecture itself seemed alive, corridors realigning their molecular structure every 17 hours, lecture halls expanding or contracting based on attendance algorithms, and gravity wells that could be adjusted to accommodate the physiological needs of 17 different star systems, native species. For most of these species, interstellar travel had become as commonplace as taking a shuttle bus. The Draxians, with their titanium-laced exoskeletons and multiple sensory appendages, dominated the military sciences. The gelatinous Morcelians excelled in theoretical physics, their fluid neural networks processing quantum equations faster than most supercomputers. The crystalline lithoids of the Cygnus arm were unmatched in architectural engineering, having designed the Academy itself. Even the gaseous Phassalians, who required specialized containment suits to maintain physical form, were respected for their unparalleled abilities in biochemical synthesis. And then there were humans. Tiny, as she'd been immediately nicknamed upon arrival, stood just 157 centimeters tall, in a school where the average height was closer to 3 meters. Her real name was Ariana Chen Watanabe, but that had been immediately discarded by her classmates in favor of the diminutive moniker that now followed her through the Academy's ever-shifting hallways. Today, the central amphitheater had reconfigured itself into a perfect hemisphere, seats arranged in concentric circles that rose at increasing angles from the presentation floor. The air inside was a carefully calibrated mix of gases that represented a compromise for most species, slightly oxygen-rich for humans like Tiny, but with trace elements of xenon and neon that the Vidians required for their enhanced cognitive functions. As Tiny entered, the whispers began immediately. Not actual whispers, the Draxians communicated through subsonic vibrations that humans couldn't hear, but could feel as uncomfortable chest palpitations. The Morcelians released pheromone signals that smelled like overripe fruit. The message from all quarters was the same. What was this fragile creature doing here? Physiologically inefficient. No redundant organs. Single-layered epidermis. Binary visual spectrum. No defensive capabilities whatsoever. The comments weren't meant to be cruel. To most Academy species, they were simply objective observations about a curious biological anomaly that humans had somehow achieved spacefaring technology despite their obvious physical shortcomings. It was a source of constant amazement that such a delicate species hadn't been extinguished by the first solar flare their planet encountered. Tiny found a seat designed for Vidians, the closest in size to humans, though still requiring her to perch on the edge, and activated her neural interface to record the assembly. The translucent display hovering before her eyes showed her vital signs, the atmospheric composition, and a real-time translation of the 17 most common languages spoken at the Academy. Dean Vorax, a massive Zentaurian with 4 arms and iridescent scales that shifted color with his emotional state, stepped onto the central platform. His scales currently displayed a formal pattern of deep blues and purples, indicating the seriousness of the occasion. "Ah, students of the 17 systems." His voice boomed through both audible sound and telepathic projection for the psychically attuned species. Today marks the commencement of the 97th Annual Apex Challenge. The amphitheater erupted in a cacophony of sound, light, and chemical signals that the Academy system struggled to filter into something Tiny's human senses could process. The Apex Challenge. Every student at the Academy knew what that meant. For our new arrivals, Dean Vorax continued his scales briefly, flashing green to signal inclusivity. The Apex Challenge represents our institution's highest test of evolutionary capability and adaptational intelligence. Each participant will face the genetically engineered Apex Beast, a creature designed to represent the pinnacle of biological advancement in solo combat. The floating display shifted to show footage from previous years. A Draxian warrior, nearly 4 meters tall with an exoskeleton that gleamed like polished obsidian, unleashing energy blasts from specialized glands. A lithoid competitor, whose crystalline body refracted the beast's attacks. A morcelian, who dissolved into 20 separate entities to confuse the predator. The winner, Vorax continued, receives the Zenith Grant full funding for any research project of their choice, unlimited access to the ancestral archives, and guaranteed placement in any specialized field upon graduation. Tiny felt her heart rate increase. The ancestral archives, the accumulated knowledge of 17 star systems dating back millions of years. Access to that would change everything for humanity's position in the interstellar community. Registration begins now and closes at the third chronometric shift. May evolution favor the most adapted. As Dean Vorax stepped away, the central platform illuminated with a holographic registration interface. Students immediately began pressing forward, mostly members of species with obvious combat advantages. The Academy had never explicitly stated that only certain species could compete, but it was an unspoken rule that humans simply didn't. What would be the point? Yet Tiny found herself moving forward, her small form easily sliding between the massive frames of Draxians and the hovering containment fields of the Thessalians. She reached the registration interface before anyone noticed the anomaly in their midst. Her finger hesitated for just a moment before pressing against the scanner. Ariana Chen Watanabe, Terra System Human. The interface pulsed with acknowledgement, and her name appeared on the floating roster for all to see. The amphitheater fell silent, followed by the Draxian equivalent of laughter, a subsonic rumble that made the floor plates vibrate. "This is highly irregular," said Professor Nerexel, a Vidian with cranial ridges that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. "Human, perhaps you misunderstood the nature of the competition." "I understood perfectly," Tiny replied, her voice steady, despite the accelerated beating of her heart. The Academy systems amplified her words so that everyone could hear. "There are no species restrictions in the official regulations." "Technically correct," conceded Dean Vorax, his scales shifting to an uncomfortable yellow-orange pattern. "Though we must caution about the biological realities." "I accept those realities," Tiny stated, then turned and walked back to her seat through the stunned silence. The silence didn't last long. By the time she reached her spot, the Draxians were vibrating with amusement, the Thessalians releasing bursts of disbelieving pheromones, and the Vidians exchanging concerned glances with their compound eyes. "The small one has no comprehension," rumbled Gorthak, a Draxian combat specialist whose black exoskeleton bore ceremonial scars from a dozen successful hunts. "Even our strongest warriors have barely survived." "Perhaps it's a uniquely human form of self-termination ritual," suggested a Morcelian named Xylith, whose amorphous body rippled with curious patterns. Only Professor Nerysol, another Vidian who specialized in comparative xenobiology, showed any reaction other than dismissal or amusement. Her compound eyes narrowed slightly as she observed Tiny head tilted in what might have been curiosity. As the assembly concluded, and the amphitheater began to reconfigure itself for the next event, Tiny found herself navigating the Academy's shifting architecture with practiced caution. For most students, the building's reconfiguration was barely noticeable, an elegant dance of matter and space that accommodated their needs. For Tiny, it presented constant challenges. Gravity wells that were refreshing dips for a Draxian could be crushing forces for her human physiology. Atmospheric vents that provided essential nutrients for Thessalians could burn her lungs if she inhaled too deeply. Every day at Voidwood was a survival exercise even before she'd signed up for the Apex Challenge. "Human." Tiny turned to see Professor Nerysol approaching her long, slender form, moving with the fluid grace typical of Vidians. Unlike most species at the Academy, Vidians were closer to human scale, standing only about 30 centimeters taller than Tiny. "Professor," Tiny acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Your registration has created quite a stir among the faculty." Nerysol said, her voice a melodic trill. "Some are concerned about potential diplomatic incidents should you be severely injured or killed." The registration form included a comprehensive waiver, Tiny replied. Indeed. Still, curiosity compels me to ask, what is your strategy? The Apex Beast was designed to counter the most formidable natural weaponry and defensive capabilities in the known galaxy. Tiny met the professor's compound gaze steadily. With respect, Professor, if I revealed my strategy, it wouldn't remain an advantage. To her surprise, Nirasal's cranial ridges pulsed with a pattern that Tiny's neural interface translated as appreciation or amusement. Quite logical, the professor acknowledged. Perhaps you would benefit from studying the anatomical and behavioral records of the Apex Beast. As a registered participant, you're entitled to access the restricted biological archives. Tiny felt a surge of excitement that she carefully kept from showing on her face. Thank you for the information, Professor. I'll make use of that immediately. One more thing, human. Nirasal added as Tiny turned to leave. The gravity in the combat arena is calibrated to Draxian optimal, approximately 1.4 times your Earth standard. You might want to adjust your training accordingly. With that parting advice, the professor glided away, leaving Tiny with both a valuable piece of information and the unsettling knowledge that at least one faculty member was taking her participation seriously enough to offer advice, which meant the danger was even more real than she had imagined. The central archives of Voidwood Academy existed in a state of quantum uncertainty, simultaneously physical and digital. For most students, accessing the archives meant a neural or telepathic interface data flowing directly into their consciousness through specialized biological adaptations. For Tiny, it meant old-fashioned visual displays and haptic interfaces calibrated for her human neurology. The restricted section on the Apex Beast required 3 separate identity confirmations before the system acknowledged her participant status and granted access. What she found was simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. The beast wasn't a natural creature at all, but rather a synthetic organism designed by the Academy's most brilliant xenobiologists over generations. It incorporated genetic material from apex predators across the 17 systems, with artificial enhancements where beneficial. Its muscle density was 8 times that of a human's. Its reaction speed outclassed even the lightning-fast Morcelians. Its hide could withstand temperatures that would melt Draxian exoskeletons. Most concerning was its adaptive intelligence. The beast learned from each encounter, developing countermeasures against strategies that had been previously employed. This explained why even repeat competitors rarely fared better in subsequent attempts. The beast remembered them and adapted accordingly. Tiny spent hours studying the creature's anatomy, paying particular attention to its spinal structure and joint configuration. Unlike most vertebrate species, the beast had a uniquely vulnerable transition point between its 4th and 5th vertebral segments, a necessary weakness to allow the flexibility its hunting style required. This weakness was normally protected by overlapping armor plates, but in certain positions. Her research was interrupted by the arrival of a group of Draxian students, led by Gorthak. They moved with the natural confidence of apex predators, the subtle vibrations of their movement causing ripples in Tiny's display. The small one prepares. Gorthak observed the translation coming through Tiny's neural interface with a tone of mocking amusement. Perhaps it seeks the quickest way to surrender. Or the least painful way to die, added another Draxian, this one, with a pale gray exoskeleton, marked with red ceremonial pigments. Tiny continued her research without acknowledgement. We are curious, Gorthak continued, leaning close enough that Tiny could smell the metallic odor of his exoskeleton. What does a species with no natural weapons or defenses hope to accomplish against the beast? Will you attempt to bore it into submission with mathematical equations? Perhaps confuse it with your inefficient respiratory process. The other Draxians vibrated with their species' equivalent of laughter. Finally, Tiny looked up. I'm simply following the Academy tradition of thorough preparation, Gorthak. I'm sure a warrior of your reputation understands the value of studying one's opponent. The subtle emphasis on reputation was not lost on the Draxian. Gorthak had competed in the previous year's challenge and had been defeated in less than 2 minutes, a humiliation by Draxian standards. His exoskeleton flushed with a deeper black indicating anger or embarrassment. Study all you wish, human. No amount of knowledge will compensate for your evolutionary inadequacies. With that, the group moved away, leaving Tiny to her research. She waited until they were completely gone before accessing the final files recordings of every previous competitor's attempt against the beast. She paid particular attention to the failures, noting the patterns in the beast's attacks and the critical mistakes that led to each defeat. By the time the Central Archives began their power conservation cycle, shifting the displays into standby mode, Tiny had formulated the beginning of a plan. It was unconventional, dangerous, and completely counter to what any other species would attempt, which was precisely why it might work. As the 3 weeks of preparation before the challenge progressed, the Academy's atmosphere grew increasingly charged with anticipation. For most species, this was a literal phenomenon. The Physalians conducted pre-combat rituals that ionized the air, while the lithoids entered crystalline meditation states that emitted subtle harmonic frequencies throughout the Academy's structure. For Tiny, preparation took a different form. Each morning cycle, she spent 2 hours in one of the Academy's adaptive gravity chambers, gradually increasing the setting until she could function at 1.5 times Earth. Normal, slightly higher than the Draxian optimal she would face in the arena. Her muscles screamed in protest, and she often emerged drenched in sweat, a biological response that fascinated and disgusted her classmates in equal measure. The human leaks again, observed Thexorn, a lithoid whose crystalline body refracted light into dazzling patterns. Such an inefficient cooling mechanism. At least our cooling doesn't alert every predator within 5 kilometers. Tiny replied, referencing the distinctive harmonic resonance that lithoids emitted when their body temperature fluctuated. The comment earned her a surprised silence from the gathered students. It was the first time many had heard her respond to the constant barrage of observations about human physiology. Professor Nirisal, who happened to be passing by, paused long enough to note, "An excellent point about evolutionary trade-offs, human. Perhaps you might expand on that in your comparative physiology dissertation." The professor moved on, but the brief interaction didn't go unnoticed. A human being treated as a serious academic by a respected faculty member. The concept was nearly as unprecedented as a human entering the Apex Challenge. In the evenings, Tiny focused on flexibility and reaction training, pushing her human reflexes to their limit. She knew she could never match the raw speed of a Morselian or the strength of a Draxian, but human agility, particularly in the joints and spine, offered advantages many heavier species lacked. As the challenge drew nearer, the other competitors began their own intensive preparations. The Draxians engaged in ritual combat that left the training facilities damaged. The Morselians practiced phase-shifting techniques that allowed them to temporarily alter their molecular density. A Physalian competitor demonstrated an impressive ability to generate localized atmospheric disturbances that could theoretically disorient the beast. Tiny watched them all, cataloging their approaches while revealing nothing of her own strategy. This earned her even more derision, as many assumed she had no plan at all. "The human still participates," noted Xylith, the Morselian, whose body rippled with patterns of disbelief. "Perhaps its neural functions are impaired by our atmosphere." Or perhaps, suggested Professor Nirisal, who had taken to observing Tiny's training with increasing frequency, she understands something about the challenge that others have overlooked. "Impossible," declared Gorthak, who had been fine-tuning his exoskeleton's energy projection capabilities. The beast was designed to counter every known biological advantage. What could a species without advantages possibly offer? "An interesting philosophical question," Nirisal replied. "What is a disadvantage in one context may be an advantage in another." Evolution favors adaptation to specific environments, not universal superiority. The conversation might have continued, but it was interrupted by the arrival of Dean Vorax, whose scales displayed an official pattern of blues and greens. The pre-challenge briefing will commence in the central amphitheater, in one chronometric cycle, he announced. All competitors must attend. As the students dispersed, the dean's gaze lingered on Tiny for a moment, longer than necessary, his scales briefly shifting to a pattern that her neural interface couldn't translate. The central amphitheater had configured itself into a formal presentation space, with the dean's platform elevated above the gathered competitors. Only 17 students had registered for the challenge. This year, one from each star system represented at the Academy, except for the Procyon system, which had 2, and the Terra system, which normally had none. Until now. Competitors. Dean Vorax began, his voice resonating through both audible and telepathic channels. Tomorrow you face the ultimate test of evolutionary fitness. The apex beast represents the combined apex adaptations of all known sentient species. It is stronger than the strongest, faster than the fastest, more resilient than the most durable. Hollow projections appeared, showing the beast from multiple angles. Standing nearly 4 meters tall with a reinforced skeletal structure, covered in overlapping armor plates, it combined the most dangerous aspects of dozens of predator species. Its 6 limbs could operate independently, or in concert, each ending in weapons specialized for different types of combat. Its sensory organs could detect everything from infrared radiation to quantum fluctuations. Each of you will enter the arena alone, continued the dean. Victory is achieved through either incapacitation of the beast or forcing it into a submission posture. The beast is programmed to recognize when it has been defeated, so there is no need to inflict lethal damage. This last point was delivered with a subtle shift in scale coloration toward Gorthak and the other Draxians, whose species was known for their thoroughness in combat. Each competitor will be provided with standard environmental protection, appropriate to their species, but no weapons or technological enhancements are permitted. You face the beast with only your natural evolutionary advantages. Again, the dean's gaze briefly fell on Tiny, who sat quietly absorbing the information. The order of competition has been randomly determined. Vorax concluded, activating a holographic display that showed the schedule. Prepare yourselves according to your species' traditions. May evolution favor the most adapted. Tiny found herself scheduled last, a position that meant she would witness every other competitor's attempt before facing the beast herself. Whether this was genuinely random or an administrative decision to allow the most unusual competitor to learn from others, she couldn't be sure. Either way, it presented both an advantage and a disadvantage. She would have the most information about the beast's current behavioral patterns, but it would also have the most time to accumulate fatigue damage from previous bouts. As the briefing concluded, competitors began the traditional pre-challenge rituals. The Draxians entered a state of exoskeletal hardening, their bodies becoming even more impervious to damage. The Morcelians engaged in fluid communion, sharing cellular information to optimize their collective adaptability. The Physaelians performed atmospheric calibration, adjusting their containment suits for maximum maneuverability. Tiny simply returned to her quarters to sleep, another biological necessity that many Academy species found inefficient and vulnerable, but which human neurology required for optimal function. As she lay on her adaptation pad, the Academy's approximation of a bed, calibrated for human spinal structure, she mentally reviewed her strategy one final time. Everything depended on precise timing, perfect positioning, and the exploitation of a single weakness that even the beast designers might have overlooked. Either she would make history tomorrow, or she would become another statistic in the long record of failed challengers. Probably the latter, if the whispers throughout the Academy were any indication. The challenge arena stood apart from the main Academy structure, a massive transparent dome situated on an artificial plateau that overlooked the swirling technicolor mists of the Voidwood itself. The dome's material was molecular-bonded transparasteel, designed to withstand forces that could shatter planetary crusts. Within the dome, environmental controls could simulate the conditions of any of the 17 star systems, though for the challenge they were set to Draxian optimal, a compromise that disadvantaged some competitors less than others. For Tiny, it meant gravity, 1.4 times Earth, normal atmospheric pressure, 1.2 times higher, and oxygen content, 3% lower. Survivable but physically taxing, even before facing the beast. The spectator areas surrounding the dome were filled to capacity. Students, faculty, and even visiting dignitaries from the various systems had come to witness the spectacle. The challenge wasn't just an academy tradition. It was an interstellar cultural event broadcast across all 17 systems as a demonstration of evolutionary excellence. And representing the Terra system, announced the official commentator, a Vidian whose melodic voice carried perfectly through the specialized acoustic system, we have Ariana Chen Watanabe, the first human competitor in the history of the Apex Challenge. A ripple of commentary washed through the spectator areas, everything from curiosity to outright derision. The betting syndicates had placed her odds of survival, let alone victory, at $10,000 to one, the longest in challenge history. From her position in the preparation chamber, Tiny could hear it all through the Academy's omnipresent translation systems. She sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, focusing on her breathing, a meditation technique as old as human civilization, yet remarkably effective at managing the neurochemical cascade of pre-combat stress. One by one, the other competitors emerged from similar chambers to face their trial. The results were broadcast on displays visible from the preparation areas, allowing each subsequent competitor to observe and adjust their strategies. Gorthak, representing the Draxian Confederation, was the first to enter. His exoskeleton had been polished to obsidian perfection, ceremonial markings glowing with bioluminescent intensity. As the massive doors to the arena slid open, he strode forward with the confidence of a born predator. The beast awaited in the center of the arena, its 6 limbs folded in a deceptively passive posture. As Gorthak approached it, rose to its full height, nearly a meter taller than the Draxian, and unfurled specialized sensory organs that immediately began analyzing its opponent. Gorthak didn't hesitate. He charged forward specialized glands along his exoskeleton, discharging energy pulses designed to disrupt the beast's neural functions. The beast absorbed the first volley without visible effect, then moved with astonishing speed for something of its size. It flanked the Draxian in seconds, 2 of its limbs lashing out in perfect coordination. Gorthak anticipated the move, his own reflexes honed by generations of evolutionary combat. He twisted, bringing his reinforced dorsal plates to bear against the attack, while simultaneously charging the specialized energy sacs beneath his exoskeleton. When the beast's strike connected, Gorthak released the stored energy in a devastating counterstrike. The beast staggered 3 of its sensory organs, temporarily overloaded by the discharge. For a moment, it seemed Gorthak might achieve the impossible, a first-round victory. He pressed his advantage, closing to grappling range where Draxians excelled. It was exactly what the beast wanted. As Gorthak attempted to lock his armored limbs around the beast's central mass, it revealed a previously concealed adaptation, microscopic barbs, that extended from its hide, penetrating even the Draxian's reinforced exoskeleton at the joint seams. Gorthak released his grip with a subsonic vibration of pain, but it was too late. The beast had secured its own hold, lifting the massive Draxian completely off the ground, and then slamming him down with bone-crushing force. The impact would have killed most species outright. Gorthak survived, thanks to his exoskeleton's shock-absorbing properties, but the damage was extensive enough that he could no longer continue. The medical extraction team entered the arena as the beast stepped back, recognizing its victory. Total combat time 3 minutes, 17 seconds. Nearly twice as long as Gorthak's previous year's performance, but still a decisive defeat. One by one, the other competitors met similar fates. Xylith the Morcelian lasted almost 7 minutes by repeatedly phase shifting to avoid direct contact, but eventually, the beast adapted to the pattern and caught the amorphous alien in mid-transformation. The Thessalian competitor managed to create an impressive atmospheric disturbance that briefly disoriented the beast, but couldn't capitalize quickly enough to secure victory. The longest bout came from Thexorn, the lithoid, whose crystalline body was nearly impervious to the beast's physical attacks. For almost 12 minutes, they engaged in a stalemate of strikes and counterstrikes, neither able to gain a decisive advantage. In the end, the beast exploited the lithoid's slower movement speed, maneuvering Thexorn into a position where his own weight and momentum worked against him. The crystalline competitor shattered upon impact with the arena floor, not fatally as lithoids could regenerate from fragments, but enough to end the challenge. By the time 16 competitors had faced the beast, and 16 had fallen, the spectator areas were buzzing with a combination of excitement and anticipation. The beast had demonstrated unprecedented adaptability, countering each species' evolutionary advantages with terrifying efficiency. Now, only one competitor remained, the one everyone had dismissed as a non-factor. Final competitor, prepare for entry, came the announcement through the preparation chamber's communication system. Tiny opened her eyes, her meditation complete. She wore the standard Academy athletic uniform modified for human proportions, a form-fitting garment designed to move with the wearer without creating drag or restriction. Unlike the other competitors, she had requested no specialized environmental adjustments beyond the basic life support monitoring that all participants received. As she approached the massive doors that would lead her into the arena, she heard the commentary from outside. And now, in what can only be described as an historical curiosity, we have our final competitor, a human from the Terra system. While we commend the courage it takes to face the beast, spectators are reminded that the medical extraction team is standing by for what will likely be the shortest bout in challenge history. Tiny took a deep breath, feeling the slightly thinner oxygen content burn in her lungs. The increased gravity pulled at her muscles, already fatigued from weeks of preparation. Everything about this environment was designed to favor species stronger than humans, which was precisely why no human had ever attempted the challenge before. The doors slid open. Sunlight from the system's triple stars flooded the chamber, momentarily blinding her, as her eyes adjusted from the dimmer preparation area. When her vision cleared, she saw the arena stretching before her, a circular space nearly 100 meters in diameter, its floor covered in a synthetic material designed to provide optimal traction for most bipedal and quadrupedal species. And in the center, the beast. It was larger in person than the hollow projections had suggested, its armored hide shifting with iridescent patterns as specialized chromatophores adjusted to the lighting conditions. As it sensed her approach, its primary sensory cluster oriented toward her multiple organs, analyzing this new and unfamiliar opponent. The arena fell silent. Even the commentator seemed momentarily at a loss for words as the smallest competitor in challenge history approached the beast with a steady, measured pace. Tiny stopped at the traditional engagement distance, close enough to signal readiness, far enough to observe the beast's initial response. For a moment, nothing happened. The beast remained motionless, its adaptive intelligence perhaps struggling to categorize this unfamiliar species and predict its combat capabilities. Then, Tiny did something no previous competitor had done. She smiled. The expression meant nothing to the beast, of course, but it triggered a ripple of confusion through the spectator areas. Was the human experiencing some sort of pre-defeat euphoria? A neurological malfunction caused by stress? Begin, came the official signal, and the beast unfolded to its full combat posture, 6 limbs extending to display the array of specialized weapons evolution and engineering had provided. Tiny didn't charge. She didn't attempt an energy discharge or phase shift, or any of the techniques the previous competitors had employed. Instead, she began to move laterally, circling the beast at a careful distance, her eyes never leaving its central mass. The beast tracked her movement, its sensory organs continuously analyzing for weaknesses or threats. After 15 seconds of this unexpected behavior, it apparently decided to force the issue. Two of its forward limbs lashed out with blinding speed, specialized appendages designed to ensnare and immobilize. Tiny dropped and rolled the increased gravity, actually helping her change direction faster than the beast had anticipated. Its strike missed by centimeters, and she was already back on her feet, still circling, still watching. Now, the beast moved with purpose, advancing toward her, with surprising speed for its mass. Tiny retreated, maintaining the distance between them, always moving laterally, rather than directly away. To the spectators, it looked like she was simply delaying the inevitable, a prey animal instinctively fleeing a predator. The human competitor appears to be employing evasive tactics. The commentator observed professional neutrality, barely masking his confusion. While admirable, this strategy cannot lead to victory, as defined by the challenge parameters. Indeed, the rules required either incapacitation of the beast or forcing it into a submission posture. Simply avoiding it for as long as possible might be impressive by human standards, but it would not constitute a win. For nearly 2 minutes, this dance continued. The beast made increasingly aggressive advances, and Tiny continued to evade with a combination of drops, rolls, and quick directional changes that utilized her smaller size and lower center of gravity. She seemed to be studying the beast's movement patterns, noting how its 6 limbs coordinated during different types of attacks. Is the human attempting to exhaust the beast? The commentator wondered aloud. A futile strategy, as the synthetic organism's endurance capabilities exceed even the most optimized Draxian warriors by a factor of 3. In the faculty observation area, Professor Nirasal watched with compound eyes, narrowed in concentration. "She's not trying to exhaust it," the Vidian said quietly. "She's provoking it." Indeed, with each successful evasion, the beast's attacks became more committed, more powerful, and slightly less coordinated. Its adaptive intelligence was processing the unusual combat style and attempting to compensate by increasing aggression rather than precision. Exactly as Tiny had hoped. After 3 minutes of this unusual combat, the beast suddenly changed tactics. Instead of direct strikes, it began herding Tiny toward the arena wall, cutting off her circular movement pattern and forcing her into an increasingly confined space. It was a hunting technique borrowed from pack predators, and it drastically reduced her options for evasion. For the first time, Tiny looked genuinely concerned. Her back was nearly against the transparasteel wall, the beast advancing with methodical certainty. "It appears the beast has countered the human's unconventional strategy," the commentator noted. "Medical extraction teams prepare for rapid deployment." The beast lunged, all 6 limbs extended, to ensure there was no escape. Tiny dropped to the ground and rolled, but this time there wasn't enough space to clear the attack completely. One of the beast's secondary limbs caught her midsection, lifting her completely off the ground. A collective gasp rose from the spectator areas. Even those who had dismissed the human's chances didn't particularly want to witness her being crushed or dismembered. But instead of struggling against the grip, Tiny went completely limp, another unexpected response. The beast lifted her higher, bringing her toward its primary sensory cluster for analysis. Perhaps it was confused by her lack of resistance, or perhaps it was simply processing the optimal method of incapacitation for this unfamiliar species. Whatever the reason, it was exactly the position Tiny had been working toward for the entire bout. As she dangled before the beast's sensory organs, apparently helpless, Tiny suddenly jackknifed her body upward with explosive force. Her small hands grabbed onto the specialized sensing appendages that protruded from the beast's central mass, using them as anchors to swing her lower body upward. With perfect precision, she drove both feet into the exact spot she had identified during her research, the transition point between the 4th and 5th vertebral segments, where the overlapping armor plates separated slightly to allow flexibility. The beast immediately released her, stepping back in what appeared to be surprise. Tiny dropped to the ground but maintained her momentum, rolling to reduce impact and coming up in a ready stance. The arena had gone completely silent. Even the commentator was momentarily speechless. The beast turned to face her again, but there was something different about its movement, a slight hesitation, an unusual angle in its posture. That single, precisely targeted strike had affected its neural transmission to the rear limbs, creating a millisecond delay in coordination. It was all Tiny needed. As the beast charged again, she didn't retreat. Instead, she ran directly toward it, timing her approach to reach it, just as its forward momentum committed it to the attack. At the last possible moment, she dropped into a baseball slide, a human sport movement completely unknown to the beast's combat database, passing directly beneath its central mass. As she slid past, her right hand shot upward, fingers precisely positioned to hook into the same vertebral junction she had struck before. With the leverage provided by her sliding momentum and the beast's own forward motion, she executed what human martial artists would recognize as a perfectly timed Ippon Seoi Neige one-armed shoulder throw. Physics did the rest. The beast's substantial mass combined with its forward momentum and suddenly disrupted neural coordination resulted in a catastrophic overbalance. Its forward limbs lost contact with the ground, its central mass tilted beyond the point of recovery, and its rear limbs, already compromised by the earlier strike, failed to compensate in time. The synthetic apex predator, combining the most formidable evolutionary advantages of 17 star systems, tumbled forward and crashed onto its back, with an impact that reverberated throughout the arena. Before it could recover, Tiny was already in motion again. She scrambled onto the beast's inverted central mass, her small hands finding the precise nerve clusters exposed in this position. With surgical precision, she applied pressure to the synthetic neural bundles that regulated the beast's equilibrium and coordination systems. The beast's limbs twitched twice, and then went still in the unmistakable submission posture programmed into its deepest neural architecture. The arena remained silent for 3 full seconds as the Academy systems verified what had just occurred. Then, the official signal sounded. Victory confirmed. Terra system competitor successful. Total combat time 5 minutes 24 seconds. The silence shattered into an explosion of sound, light, and chemical signals as 17 species of spectators reacted simultaneously to the unprecedented outcome. The commentator's voice could barely be heard over the cacophony. Impossible. The human competitor has achieved victory through, I'm not even sure what to call that technique. In 97 years of the Apex Challenge, no competitor has ever defeated the beast using leverage and neural pressure points, rather than overwhelming force or specialized evolutionary adaptations. In the faculty section, Professor Nirasal's cranial ridges were pulsing with intense bioluminescent patterns of scientific excitement. Brilliant, the Vidian professor murmured. She identified the only real vulnerability in the beast's design. It was engineered to counter strength with greater strength speed, with greater speed durability, with greater force. It was never programmed to defend against leverage-based techniques, because no species with insufficient strength to directly challenge it would ever attempt such an approach. Dean Vorax's scales had shifted to a pattern of bright yellows and whites indicating extreme surprise, or even shock. The implications are significant, he acknowledged. Meanwhile, in the arena, Tiny carefully climbed down from the still immobilized beast. The increased gravity and exertion had taken their toll. Her movements were shaky, her breathing labored. Medical extraction teams rushed forward, though for the first time in challenge history, they were there to attend to the victor, rather than a defeated competitor. As they reached her, Tiny finally allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. She had gambled everything on a theory that the most advanced predator in known space would have no defense against techniques developed by a supposedly inferior species that had evolved facing larger, stronger predators. That sometimes being the smallest and weakest competitor meant developing completely different solutions to survival problems. The human requires oxygen supplementation and hydration, declared the medical team leader, Avidian, whose compound eyes betrayed astonishment despite professional composure. Vital signs indicate extreme exertion, but no serious injuries. As they guided her toward the exit, the spectator areas erupted in renewed commotion. The Draxians were vibrating with disbelief, the Morcelians releasing chaotic pheromone patterns of recalculation, and the Vidians engaging in rapid-fire technical discussions about the implications of what they had just witnessed. By the time Tiny emerged from the medical recovery chamber, the Academy was in the throes of what could only be described as an evolutionary philosophy crisis. The central tenet that had guided interstellar relations for generations, that species with more advanced physical capabilities were inherently superior, had been fundamentally challenged by a small human, using nothing but precision leverage and the beast's own strength against it. Professor Nirasal was waiting outside the chamber, cranial ridges, pulsing with scholarly enthusiasm. Fascinating execution of biomechanical principles, the Vidian declared without preamble. You identified the vertebral weak point through anatomical research, I presume. Tiny nodded, still conserving energy as her body recovered from the ordeal. The archives had complete schematics. The junction required flexibility for movement, but created a neural transmission vulnerability when hyperextended. Most competitors never considered attacking the beast's neurological system directly, Nirasal observed. They focus on overwhelming its defenses through superior force. Humans never had that luxury, Tiny replied. Throughout our evolutionary history, we were smaller and weaker than our predators. We survived by understanding their vulnerabilities better than they did. The professor's compound eyes blinked in what might have been approval. An important lesson for the Academy. Perhaps we have been too focused on competitive advantages rather than adaptive intelligence. Before Tiny could respond, Dean Vorax approached his scales, now displaying the formal blues and greens of official Academy business. Human competitor, he began, then corrected himself. Ariana Chen Watanabe, the Zenith Grant Committee awaits your presentation. As victor of the Apex Challenge, you are entitled to propose any research project for full Academy funding and support. Tiny straightened, despite her fatigue. This was the moment she had been working toward, not just personal vindication, but an opportunity to elevate humanity's standing in the interstellar community. My proposal is prepared, Dean Vorax. I wish to establish the Comparative Adaptive Intelligence Institute dedicated to studying how physically disadvantaged species develop unique problem-solving methodologies that can benefit all sentient life. The Dean's scales shifted briefly to a pattern of surprise before returning to formal blue. An unconventional proposal. Typically, victors request funding for research benefiting their specific species or home system. With respect, Dean, Tiny replied, that approach reinforces the same evolutionary competition that I just demonstrated has limitations. True advancement comes from understanding all adaptive paths, not just the ones that lead to greater physical capability. From the edge of her vision, Tiny could see Professor Nirasal's cranial ridges pulsing with what the neural interface translated as profound, scholarly excitement. The committee will consider your proposal. Vorax stated, his tone neutral, but his scale patterns showing complex waves of recalculation. In the meantime, there are numerous requests for interviews and analysis of your unprecedented victory. The Academy Public Relations Department will assist in managing these inquiries. As the dean departed, Tiny became aware of the crowd gathering at a respectful distance. Students from multiple species, including several who had previously dismissed her presence as an evolutionary curiosity. Their body language and chemical signals conveyed a complex mixture of confusion, reassessment, and in some cases, a new species of respect. Gorthak approached his black exoskeleton, now repaired from the damage sustained during his bout with the beast. For a moment, He simply towered over her sensory appendages, twitching in what might have been discomfort or uncertainty. The human victory was unexpected. He finally stated the subsonic frequencies accompanying his words, lacking their usual dismissive overtones. "Evolution is full of unexpected developments," Tiny replied. "That's rather the point of adaptive intelligence." The Draxian's exoskeleton shifted color slightly, an involuntary reaction indicating either agreement or discomfort, possibly both. "The Draxian Combat College would value an analysis of your technique for academic purposes." Coming from a Draxian warrior, it was tantamount to asking for lessons, an unprecedented acknowledgement that a physically inferior species might have something to teach them. "I would be happy to provide a detailed analysis," Tiny responded, careful to maintain a neutral tone that wouldn't challenge the Draxian's pride. "Perhaps as part of a cultural exchange on adaptive combat methodologies." Gorthak inclined his massive head in what passed for a Draxian nod, and moved away, his posture notably less dismissive than it had been just hours earlier. As the days passed, Tiny's victory became the central topic of discussion throughout the academy. What had initially been dismissed as an anomaly or fluke was gradually recognized as something more profound, a demonstration that evolutionary fitness encompassed far more than raw physical capability. The Zenith Grant Committee unanimously approved her proposal for the Comparative Adaptive Intelligence Institute, with several faculty members, including Professor Nirasal, requesting positions as research collaborators. Species that had previously ignored humanity as an evolutionary footnote now sent official diplomatic inquiries about potential knowledge exchanges. Most significantly, the Academy Curriculum Committee convened an emergency session to revise the introductory xenobiology course, removing language that classified species hierarchically based on physical capabilities, and replacing it with a more nuanced framework that recognized different evolutionary paths as having unique advantages in different contexts. 1 month after the challenge, as Tiny walked through the Academy's crystalline corridors, which now seemed to reconfigure themselves more considerately, when she approached, she passed a group of new students just arriving for the academic year. Among them was another human looking as overwhelmed and out of place as she had once felt. The new arrival was already attracting the familiar subsonic vibrations and chemical signals of curiosity and dismissal from several Draxian and Morcelian students. Before the situation could progress, Tiny approached the group. "Welcome to Voidwood Academy," she said to all of them, but with a particular nod to the human student. "I'm Ariana Chen Watanabe, Director of the Comparative Adaptive Intelligence Institute." The Draxians immediately ceased their subsonic communications, their exoskeletons shifting to more formal coloration. The Morcelians' chemical signals changed to patterns of recognition and reassessment. "You're the one who defeated the beast," the human student said, eyes widening in recognition. "Using judo techniques adapted for xenobiological application. Your paper on leverage-based combat against physiologically superior opponents is required reading at Earth's Interstellar Academy now." Tiny smiled. "Evolution is full of surprises. Sometimes the most effective adaptation isn't growing stronger claws or tougher armor. It's developing the intelligence to use an opponent's strength against them." As she guided the new students toward the orientation amphitheater, Tiny noticed Dean Vorax observing from a distance, his scales displaying a pattern that her neural interface now recognized as philosophical reassessment. The universe was vast and filled with countless evolutionary paths. For the first time in the Academy's history, all of them, even those that led to small, seemingly vulnerable species like humans, were being recognized as worthy of serious study. Not because humans were physically impressive or naturally dominant, but because they had demonstrated something even more valuable, that intelligence, precision, and understanding could overcome even the most formidable evolutionary advantages. In the grand competition of galactic evolution, humanity had just changed the rules of the game.